Hello everyone, my name is Brad Cathcart, and this is my official deliverable for the TP Education Officer position of MISSO. So the first step for solving any of Dr. Park's old exams is to go ahead and go over to his main page, scroll about halfway down, and you'll find this list of old exam ones dating all the way back to fall 2010. So I'm just going to kind of pick one out of the hat here. I worked through all of them when I took the class, so hopefully I can pull this out regardless. I don't want to pick a summer one. That would probably be too easy. I've found that those ones tend to be a little more simple. I don't know if he does it on purpose because it's summer, but let's go with fall 2015. So this is what the actual exam will look like when you sit down in class. He will give you a stack of papers, and you'll have a pencil, and he will basically just say go. To kind of navigate you around this page, though, you have the basic algorithm that he's asking you to create right here. This is question number 1. And then he has the raw data over on this side. So you're basically taking this raw data and you're going to put a context to it, and you're going to take this context and you're going to dynamically roll out a table in JavaScript and HTML in order to produce something with a little more meaning like this. So Dr. Park is actually nice enough to give you this solution during the exam. I mean, he will show you what the end result is supposed to look like. It's your job to fill in the steps of taking this raw data and how to produce this. So you will know exactly what it should look like when you're done, and that helps a lot. One thing I do want to point out before I start working through the problems is that question number 1, if you dig through all of the previous exams, you'll see that question number 1 is always dynamically rolling out a table. So it's going to be something that's similar to this in every case. Sometimes it'll have a heading. Sometimes he might kind of throw some curveball into there, like giving you more columns in the actual algorithm up here than you need down here, so you need to work through how to actually ignore one of those columns in your end result. Otherwise you'll end up with too many columns and he'll take off points for that. So he will throw in a curveball most likely, but to kind of alleviate your concerns, it will always be some form of table like this. Question number 2 is always going to be some curveball in itself. It's always an oddball. It's going to really test your limits because it's going to be completely different from exam to exam. So there's no way that I can really prepare you in terms of telling you, okay, you're going to have an image such as an American flag that you need to recreate, or you're going to have radio buttons. I was actually in the radio buttons class. 15 previous exams, and I sat down on the first day and there were radio buttons. Yeah, that was fun. The point is, if you dig down deeply into the fundamentals of what's going on behind here, you should still be okay though, because if you look at it, it is still actually just a table. You're using the same concepts that you used up here, but you're kind of reconceptualizing them in a new way that you wouldn't really expect that it would apply to when you think, okay, I roll out a table with JavaScript. You wouldn't think about it, but this is just another form of table. So you have these stars, which form the actual cells that you'd be placing into the table. You have the rows, all of that. You're literally just creating a table. You're just kind of doing it in a new way. So just to kind of put you at ease there and to get you to kind of think in that way, that makes your life a lot easier on question 2, is just to remember that you're really just doing the same thing, just in a new way. So, the main thing that I can tell you about solving any TP exam is that this is not an exam over your syntax. Now, you need to have your syntax down well enough that you can actually write out your answer in JavaScript, because, like I said, you won't have any form of IDE that can kind of direct you around and show you, oh, you forgot a parenthesis, or you forgot a quotation mark here. So you don't get that benefit of knowing whether or not you messed it up. You literally have a blank piece of paper. So you need to have the syntax down well enough that that's not what you're worried about when the exam rolls around. Because what he actually grades you on is your algorithm. He's looking for the steps that you've put down and how they apply to what he's put out in this numerical set of directions for you. So like I said, the first one's always going to be a table. In this case, it's the top 100 best places to work are shown. He says to the right, it's to the left. So the top 100 best places to work are going to be listed here in raw data. So, I mean, if anyone were to look at this, it would just be kind of like someone barfed data onto a screen. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to you right now, but as you can see, there is some measure of context to it. There's a 1, Google, there's a number, and information technology. I mean, you can kind of see where this is going. He does give you what each of those mean here. So obviously 1 would be rank, company name, Google, number of employees is what this 28,633 is, and then industry, company type, state. So he breaks it all down for you and then explains how this data is separated. In this case, each of these first 5 are separated by an asterisk, with the last one being separated by the £, or hashtag for you millennials. This is an important distinction to make, and you'll see it over and over again as you breeze through the other exams, is that the first few of them will have the same separation. The final one has its own unique one, and there's a reason for that I'll get into, but basically this is going to be what breaks your columns. This is going to be what breaks your rows. So getting into it, you'll see that he always lists in capital letters, no HTML, do not show HTML. Let me go and pop open the source code, which is complete with different little annotations actually explaining to you for your own time how to work through these problems and what the different lines mean. For the purposes of this video, however, obviously I will be working through the solution on my own, but I just wanted to give you some quick pointers here before I get into that. So this is what the source code looks like. When he says no HTML, obviously you'll need to have some amount of HTML in your answer, such as the table tags. But what he's referring to are, for instance, this head section of your HTML page that includes things like your metadata, styles, various other properties that are important for the HTML page, but not important for your answer in this course. So definitely things that you'll want to learn if you want to pursue any kind of web design, but not things that you need to worry about right now. So your actual answer will start here with the word function. So that's always going to be the first word on your paper. No matter what his exam is, you're going to write function. Let me go ahead and pop open. For this, I'm going to use Notepad. I mean, obviously, you can use any kind of IDE. There are other ones out there, definitely, that will show you some amount of construction in terms of whether or not you're writing your code properly. It'll help you find errors. It'll highlight things, color things, whatever. But for the purposes of this, keep in mind that when it comes to exam time, you will have a blank piece of paper, so it might be best to go ahead and just start working through it without that as soon as possible. So for this, I am going to use Notepad. You begin each of your answers, like I said, with the word function, and then you can give that function a name. Typically for the exams, he will actually give you the name. Let's see here. Typically, yeah, it's going to be P1 for the first one, and then P2 for the second. So go ahead and keep that in mind if you just want to get in the habit of writing out function P1, but you can name that anything you want. You could name it function Brad. Doesn't really matter. Throw an open and closed parenthesis after it to signify that there is some action going on associated with it. And then you are going to put in an open curly bracket to enclose your overall function into one section of your answer. Now, I highly recommend reading through the steps as many times as possible to conceptualize the problem because he does densely pack it with a lot of information. And like I said, he does throw some curveballs into there. So make sure that you have the full understanding of what's being asked of you before you even write down the first word. So right here he says that there will be 3 arrays, one that has the possible values of industry, one that has INC is the name of it, and what that's going to do is be a counter for the number of companies in the industry data, and then you'll have another counter that will accumulate the number of employees in each industry. So what this means is this is essentially the list of biotechnology and pharmaceuticals, construction and real estate, those titles that are over here of the industries. What these two are going to be are counters that you set at 0 initially, and you'll have those increment in order to count up the number of the different companies that are in this particular industry, such as 3, 4, etc. So that's kind of the cue there that he's not going to give you this information. You will have to actually derive it from the data that he gives you. Luckily, he does say that you don't need to write these arrays out on your exam, which is great news, but as you're practicing them at home, you will need to include them in your answers so that the function works appropriately. So if you want to go ahead and just copy these and throw them into your answer, just so that that's squared away. So as you can see, all of that you luckily don't have to put onto your written piece of paper, but just be sure to include it when you're working through the problem. Now each answer for a TP exam is going to be kind of split into multiple parts. So there's the initialization tasks, such as drawing the data out from this form and saving it as a variable. Just certain tasks like that, setting counters to 0, these tasks that occur before you actually dynamically roll out a table. So the initialization tasks for this particular example include, like I said, drawing out the data from this form, which is in a text area named TA1, and the form name is F1. So go ahead and pop this open. Now you can draw out that data and store it into any variable name that you choose. Typically, just for ease, I like to just follow the alphabet. So I would go A equals document dot F1, which is your form name, dot TA1, which is the text area, dot value. So what that means is that you're taking the value of this text box, which is included in this form and included on this HTML document, and you're storing that value as the variable A. So that's the first step that you should really go through for most exams that I've looked through. I mean, I wouldn't put it past Parks to change up the format occasionally, but I mean, that's typically the first thing you're going to need to do, is to draw that data out and store it into a variable. The next step, now that you have that data saved as a variable, is to then manipulate that data. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is, as it says here, you'll be creating a table. It's going to have 3 columns, and realistically you'll want to leave it dynamic so that should you ever add additional rows to it, you don't lock it in and make it static. So go ahead and read through again and again what aspects he's actually wanting you to use in your answer. This goes back to how I said that he does try to throw curveballs into it. And so as you can see, he really only wants you to create a table that has the name of the industry, the number of companies that's in that industry, and the number of employees for all companies in that industry. But as you can see, the raw data includes things like the rank, it includes the company name, it includes the state. That's a lot of information that you don't need to worry about for the actual answer. So don't fall into the habit of just rolling out a table with all of the information, all of the data, and throwing it into columns, because he does try to test your actual understanding of the material and see how you can manipulate it according to the constructs of the question. That being said, you still do need to go ahead and break this data up into rows, and you do that by using the split. So when you do a split, you take the data that's saved as a variable here, again saved as A, and you're going to manipulate and resave that as a new variable. So for this one, like I said, I just like to follow the alphabet, so let's call it B equals A dot split, and then inside of these parentheses you're going to say what character that you're going to split the data up on. In this case, he gives you the pound sign. So go ahead and throw that into quotation marks and close parenthesis. And so what you're doing here is you're taking all of this data, and if you look through, there's asterisk, 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 and then eventually you see the pound sign. It's splitting that data up and storing it into sections. So now this Google with the #1 ranking and the information technology, public, California, all of that is now stored as its own separate segment of the overall data. So it's no longer just part of a gigantic block. We now have 100 blocks of unique separated data that we can then continue to manipulate. Now, algorithmically speaking, the first step that you're going to want to take is to create a loop that will accumulate those industry totals. So the number of companies found in the industry. That's the next step that he asks you for. Again, don't be blinded by all of this information. What he wants to happen is that you're going to create this table, and now that you've split up that data, the next step is to create that loop that will count through all of those companies found in the industry. For this, you'll use a for loop whose syntax involves 3 pieces of important information, all enclosed in parentheses. It has the initialization, which is kind of setting the stopwatch to 0, because that's what you're going to be using this for in this case, is kind of as a stopwatch. It's going to continuously just act and act and act, you know, that noise that he does with the hand cranking motion, it's just going to continue acting from the point at which I equals 0. So that's the starting point. That's where you've initialized this counter. You're going to separate that with a semicolon, and you're going to tell it where to stop. So you can use a variety of different ways to signify where it should stop. You can use a static number, such as in this case, I actually plan on doing it that way with the number 100, because it's the top 100 best places to work. So realistically speaking, we can expect that that number won't increase any. The information contained in the data set might change, but the amount probably won't change since it's the top 100. For other amounts, though, that are more fluid, you may want to set it to dot length. So, I mean, if you take the variable that you've saved the data as and then just put dot length, such as I is less than a dot length, that would be a nice dynamic way to handle it, and best practice would actually say that you should do it that way always, but for ease on this particular problem, since it does appear to be statically set at 100, we're just going to say I is less than 100. And so what that means is, again, you have the counter starting at 0, and then it will continuously loop and loop and loop until it reaches 100. Throw another semicolon in there to separate out these segments of the for loop, and you're going to say I plus plus. And what that means is that you are incrementing your answer one step at a time, as opposed to, for instance, I plus 2, which would be incrementing it every other step. For this one, you're going to be incrementing it by 1 each time. And then close parenthesis. Best practice says that after you open up a for loop, you should go ahead and throw an open curly bracket as well. This way you can enclose multiple steps if necessary. In this case, there should be several. The first to follow through with, though, is to continue splitting that data up. This time, instead of splitting it into rows, you're going to actually split up on the asterisk into the individual cells of the row. So in order to do that, you're going to follow the same basic construct as before, only you will go C, again just following the alphabet, equals B, and because B in this case was already split, that means it was stored in an array. So what you're going to do is enclose the letter I in brackets. And the reason for doing that is because you have this for loop that's going to continue cranking through over and over and over again through each section of that array. So here's what an array looks like, just to kind of help you visualize. Once you've split it up on this pound sign, you've now stored this information, each of these rows, into this general construct here. And the for loop will continuously go through each of these segments of your raw data until it reaches the end. So you now have an array named B, and what you're going to do is follow the same syntax where it's dot split open parenthesis, only this time you are going to split it on the asterisk because you're dividing up those rows into their individual table cells. And so what you've now done is created a new array named C, in which the first segment is going to be 1, the second is going to be Google Inc., the third is going to be 28,633, the fourth is going to be information technology, and so on and so on. And you're going to use that array in order to identify what industry the company is in and then increment it accordingly. So in order to do that, we're going to need a second for loop to continuously loop through that information. So go ahead and throw in 4. And this time, since we already have I listed here and we're working within that loop, you will have to name it something different. So if you just follow the alphabet again, go with J equals 0. J is less than 14 because there are only 14 industries. And J plus plus because, again, we're incrementing it one at a time. Throw another squiggly bracket open here. And now we're going to have an if statement that will continuously test the data that we have split up now and see if any of it matches the industry data that's stored in the IND array above. So put if C3, and the reason why we're going with 3 is because JavaScript starts counting at 0. I'm sure you've heard that a million times from Dr. Parks. The first value stored in our array right now is the ranking. So in this case, it's going to be a 1, but that's going to be stored in the 0 position, meaning that Google Inc. is stored in the 1 position. So if you're counting through here, this here in an array is the 0 position, this is the 1 position, the 2 position. So if you were to fill it in with this data, it would be 1, Google Inc., 28,633, information technology. So as you can see, information technology, although the fourth piece of data is actually 0, 1, 2, 3. So you're wanting to test the data that's stored in that particular segment of your array against the data that's stored within the IND array. In this case, you'll use a J because you're looping through with a J variable at this point. You are still working with the I variable in the overall for loop, but in this particular one, we're not working with J. And so it's going to loop through 14 times. And so it's going to loop through all 14 entries and continuously test it against the data contained in the third spot of that array. And anytime we find a match, what we're going to do is store that information in the INC array. And so this is the INC array, and it tracks the number of companies within each of the 14 industries. And so when it finds a match here with the raw data here, you will then increment it into this array here and store that information for later use. I wish it were as simple as that, though. As I said, Dr. Parks does like to throw some curveballs into here, and upon a deeper reading of this exam question, you'll see that it does say in big bold letters, caution. Some companies do not report their number of employees, and so this value will be confidential instead of a number. So we will have to manipulate the data in such a way that it takes into account the fact that confidential might be a value that's returned. So in order to do that, we're going to throw another if statement into there. And think of it literally as a statement to help you figure out when and where to use this particular JavaScript statements. You're literally saying verbally, if this data that's contained in C2, and I say C2 now because we're talking about the number of employees does not equal confidential. Then go ahead and proceed with the next step of this algorithm, which is to count the number of employees in the particular industry. So what we're basically saying is ignore if it says confidential, but if it does have a number associated with it, go ahead and save that information back within this same EMC array over and over again, but with the addition of the number of employees calculated with a %. And the reason for using a %, is anytime we have any mathematical data that we want to save as mathematical data to later manipulate and continue using, as opposed to saving it as a string, use the % function to save it in that format. All right, and so that actually knocks out the bulk of the groundwork that we need to take care of this problem. And I realize that was a lot of explanation just to give this small amount of code, but the thing is, once you work through enough of these, you'll realize that it's the same format over and over and over again. I mean, you're saying function P1, you're throwing a few initialization tasks such as pulling the data, splitting the data, and then creating a couple of for loops that are going to dynamically roll out that split data between rows and columns, and maybe just one or two additional manipulations just to show that you're awake and working on it. And so as you can see, this really isn't a lot of code, so don't get overwhelmed. I realize this has taken a little bit of explanation, but you will get the hang of it, I promise. It's virtually the same thing over and over again. Go ahead and make sure that all of your squiggly brackets are closed at this point. That's the reason why I kind of split them up the way in which I do, is so that going back through, you can kind of line those up and be sure that you have them all taken care of. At this point, we get to do the fun stuff, and this is where we start dynamically rolling out that table using HTML. And so this is the part in which I said, ignore the fact that he said, show no HTML. You will actually use some minor bits of HTML, but it's always going to be the same general stuff, such as table tags and what have you. For this, you'll want to go ahead and initialize your output string with your opening table tag. You can name this output string anything you want, but best practice for this class, just so you understand what he's talking about as you go through and view the source of all the previous exams, is to go ahead and call it OS. That's the particular variable that he tends to use over and over again for his output string, and it quite literally stands for output string, so it should be easy to remember. And when you enter any kind of HTML into JavaScript, you do have to throw it inside of quotation marks. So go ahead and throw that in there, and then once you put in your opening quotation mark, I don't know if you're familiar with HTML or not, but you can go ahead and start writing it as you normally would outside of this JavaScript function. So in this case, we have table, border equals 1. Be sure that when you use quotation marks here, you're using the single quotation mark as opposed to the double, because you've already used those doubles. If you use double and then double, it's going to cut this off and think that that's your full HTML entry, which obviously that is not. The point of the border being set to 1 is if you look at his answer, you can see that it has a border of 1. For almost all of them, you're going to do border of 1. There's only been a couple that weren't. One of them was actually exam 2 of my particular class. He used a solid border, so that was something to keep in mind for that particular answer. It was, instead of being this white border, it was all black. And so I know that tripped a lot of people up who didn't pay attention and realized that the border had actually technically changed. That's not necessary for this particular one, but just know that if you did have a border in there that was solid, that's the point at which you could do, the additional HTML such as that. Now, in order to dynamically roll out an HTML table using JavaScript, you are going to need a for loop to do the busy work for you. We have actually closed both of our initial for loops up here, so if you want to go ahead and reuse I as your variable for this, feel free. You can use J as well, or you can just keep going down the alphabet to K or whatever else you would like to name it. In this particular case, because there is a static number of rows that you'll be working with, you can use just a set in stone value of I is less than 14, or you could do, dot length if you wanted to. But just for ease in this particular case, just throw I is less than 14 as your stop point, because there's only going to be 14 different industries possible in this answer. And then we're going to increment it by 1 over and over. Throw the opening squiggly bracket in there, and then what we're going to do here is start building onto this initial output string that we have started with the table border equals 1. And so when you think about how this is going to work, right now if you were to call on this variable, this is all that's stored in there. Now obviously that's not enough to roll out a table. We need more. We need row tags, we need table data tags, we need the actual content within those, we need our closing tags, we need all of that. So we're going to build onto that OS variable, and you do that by saying OS equals OS, because you want to take this output string, add whatever we're going to put onto it, and then resave it as OS. We don't want to sit here and build a new variable for every single entry, so just save it over itself for convenience and making as little code as possible. So OS plus, and you're going to have a TR tag, that's a table row tag in HTML, stored within these quotation marks. And again, since we have a static set of columns in this particular question, we know it's just going to be 3, and that's an easy number to work with. We only need one for loop for this particular table rollout, so we're just going to have it build these rows, and those rows we're going to manually set ourselves by simply going OS and this is a table data tag, which is just like a table row tag, only instead of referring to this whole combined set of information like the table row tag does, what we're doing is we're filling in the individual cells. So this first one is going to be the industry. When I put in another table data tag, it's going to be the number of companies in that industry. And in order to do that, we're going to throw some raw JavaScript between these two table data tags to ensure that it is dynamically being built from the arrays that we have set at the top of the problem. So for this one, we're going to have the IND array, and we're going to have our for loop through each one of the entries of that array. So go ahead and put I as the variable within that array. And then plus, you have to do plus signs in order to connect the raw JavaScript to your HTML tags. And then you're going to have a closing tag for your table data. So the reason why we're doing a closing tag for our table data, but we haven't done a closing tag for the table row, is because all of this data that we're going to be putting in here for each of the columns is going to be enclosed within one of these table rows. And now we can move on to the next column, which is going to be output string equals output string plus same format here, except we're going to throw a little oddball extra thing in here because I don't know if he necessarily is going to mark off for this if you don't catch it, but for best practice, go ahead and watch out for the fact that he does have these aligned to the right on the second and third column here. These are aligned to the left. So it's aligned left by default, so you don't have to worry about typing align equals left for HTML in order to do that. But because this is, as you can see, on the right side of the cell, you want to try and recreate it as much as possible. And so always be sure to look for those almost imperceptible changes from what the table should look like by default, because he may be including that in part of his rubric for whether or not you're getting the full points for that problem. So to be on the safe side, let's go ahead and do align equals right. And again, we're using single quotation marks because we are within a double quotation mark HTML tag right now. and then you can just close it as normal. And so what this does is within that table data tag, it's aligning just that table data to the right side of the cell. And then we're enclosing it just the same way, and we're doing it actually a similar process as the line just above here, with the minor caveat that we will be using a different array, and this array actually has a mathematical integer that you can work with. And because of that, we need to store this information not as, the integer that it is currently, but as a string, so that when it outputs this information, it's not a mathematically saved number, it's actually going to be a textual number, so to speak. So .to string, and you'll have the opening and closing parentheses to show that you're functionally doing something here. And so that's taking this number, which in this case is going to be 3, and instead of saving it in the mathematical 3, it's saving it as a text 3. And you're going to throw the same table data closing tag as you did before. The next line is actually going to be exactly the same as the one before, since you're going to be taking raw mathematical data from an array and storing it as a string into the next cell. And it's going to be right aligned, so all of it's going to be the same. For this particular one, I will just go ahead and copy and paste it for ease. And this is also a good time to go ahead and point out that you should always double check your answers as you work on them. Even if you think you have it all right, you might miss some minor thing, such as a semicolon right there. I just noticed I had forgotten. So that's a good lesson for you. Always double check your work. So this line, like I said, is exactly the same, except instead of INC for the array, you're going to be doing EMC. And so that gives you the employee count. Now that you have the 3 columns set up and squared away, you can go ahead and close this particular table row. And so you just do that the same way as you've been doing before. Output string equals output string plus, and you throw on a closing table row tag, and then a closing squiggly bracket. And that is essentially your answer. I mean, there is another step here. We still need to close the main table tag, but this is your repeating answer that's going to start with the first row, end with that last row, and fill in all of the information that you've already initialized and saved in variables with your JavaScript above. This way, if you make any alterations to the data at a future date, you don't have to dig through lines and lines of HTML code in order to manually replace these things. And also, should you have many, many more rows than this, I mean, we could have been listing off 100 rows to talk about the 100 top companies. That happens. There could be 500 rows. There could be 10,000 rows if you're an actual company working on this information. So it's important to not have to write thousands of lines of code in raw manual HTML. And that's what this powerful script gives you the ability to do. So that's why this class is important. In order to close that table tag, you're actually going to follow the same format as before in terms of output string equals output string plus, and then you'll have a close table tag. That leaves us with only one minor step left, and this will typically always be the same as well. So just like when you start your function at the beginning of your answer, just kind of get in the habit of always remembering to put this in here. He says that he wants you to store this JavaScript function into the div block named p1out. And so to do that, you're going to follow this syntax of p1out, and you're naming it as we go. I mean, this is a free-form programming language. So p1out dot inner HTML equals OS, because you want to have your output equal to this variable that you just set up here throughout the entire problem. And then semicolon, and your final squiggly bracket that should align with the one that you started out with up here at the beginning. So this is your completed answer number 1, and this is how it should look for you on your piece of paper. Obviously, if you were to do your piece of paper for the exam, this part wouldn't be part of your answer. That's just too much to have to worry about. So he just has you do this. This is what your completed work should look like. I'm not going to count them, but that looks like about 15 lines of code. Not a big deal whatsoever, and I assure you that there's enough overlap between each of the exams that if you practice the syntax enough and you start to see how he lays things out algorithmically, that you should be able to get this down, no problem. You just have to put in the effort in order to see where that overlap is and understand when he throws in those extra little curveball manipulations that you need to make from exam to exam.